In a weak draft class, the tight ends stand out with 5 taken in the top 50. But where should you take them in fantasy? We'll break all that down on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Today we're talking tight ends. If you've missed our other positional coverage, you can check out our quarterback, running back, and wide receiver videos on the channel. Plus, you might also want to check out when I accidentally made the world's most accurate mock draft and won the Fantasy Pros comp. There's a rundown of that on the YouTube channel as well. But today we're talking tight end. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below, or you can hit me up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Also really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe on YouTube if you enjoy the video. If you want to check out my full rankings, and the Dynasty rankings are going to be up there very soon, ffdfantasyfootball.com is the place you can go. You can check out my full rookie rankings over there. But today we're talking tight ends, and let's get into it so we can keep the video short and sweet. We're starting off with Colston Loveland, who was, of course, the first off the board. And that created a shock for a lot of people because Tyler Warren was a pretty heavy favorite. By bookmakers, he was considered about an 80-something% chance to be the first off the board, and it didn't turn out that way. And I'm not that mad at it. I quite like Colston Loveland going in. If you watch any of my draft videos, you'll know that I was pretty high on Loveland relative to Tyler Warren. I feel like Tyler Warren has some limitations. He was a bit overrated by a lot of teams. So I'm all about the Bears taking Loveland. Don't know that they needed to do it here. I think they probably could have waited a little bit later and traded down, but we saw that a lot of teams were struggling to trade down, so it was a reasonable pick. Where Loveland sits going to be very interesting. He could kind of play that Brock Bowers style role to Cole Kmet, who would obviously be playing the Michael Mayer role, meaning Loveland would be the primary receiver. He isn't the greatest blocker, but he is very solid, especially around the red zone as a receiver, and he can get down the seam as well. He's a solid route runner. He's got solid hands. Nothing too special there, but he's just good all round in most areas of the game. And for that reason, he is someone who can play as a possession receiver. The Bears do need someone to step into that role because they did lose Keenan Allen last year. So there are certainly targets to be found. And I do think that Loveland is someone who can step in and take advantage of that. Is he going to be a fantastic asset for fantasy? I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be a solid tight end 2 with the upside to turn into a tight end 1. For that reason, I'm taking him late in the first round. Now, even though I don't like Tyler Warren as much as a player, I do like him better as a fantasy asset. He's a pretty average blocker, but he's a very good receiver. He's a strong route runner. He's excellent in the red zone. He'll be able to play in all phases of the game. And for that reason, I expect, especially with the way the Colts set up, he'll get a lot of receiving opportunities, and I think he'll probably also get a lot of touchdowns. There are no threats to him on the roster. It's going to be him as the number 1 every down guy, and I think they're going to give him plenty of opportunities to be that man. So for that reason, I'm willing to take him in the top 10 in my fantasy draft. I think I've officially got him ranked 9th in normal PPR leagues. If it is a tight end premium league, I think you can arguably take him significantly earlier. I think he's in the conversation to go even ahead of guys like Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and stuff like that because of the tight end premium aspect. But I'd certainly be taking him 7th at the latest in those sort of leagues. Even in a super flex league, I still think he is a first round option. After that, there was a bit of a gap in the draft, and there's also a bit of a gap for fantasy. I do really like Mason Taylor. I think he's a quality player. He's a far better blocker than the other two, but as a receiver, he does get let down a little bit. He's more of a red zone guy. He's not going to be out there on every phase of the offense, but he is a very strong red zone weapon. He's a big target. He's got good hands. He's an okay receiver in other areas of the field, but I don't feel like he's going to become the top weapon for the Jets, whereas I feel like there is the upside for Warren to become the main Colts receiver. So for that reason, the Jets are more likely to use him as more of like a number 3 guy. I still think he's going to be better than guys like Conklin and Ruckert, but we saw Conklin get a lot of receptions. It'll be interesting to see if Taylor can step up and somehow step into that role. I'm not anticipating that'll be the case, but I think it's possible. For that reason, I'm talking about getting him late to mid second round, depending on how much need you have for a tight end. Terrence Ferguson went off the board next, but I'm going to jump to Elijah Arroyo first because I do think he's a better fantasy asset and just generally a better receiver. The main concerns about him and the reason he fell were injury related. There were a lot of issues around injuries going into the draft, and that means some teams just weren't willing to take him. But he's a very solid player. He's great in the red zone. He's got really good hands. He's explosive. He's good after the catch. Not as good as a Warren or even a Loveland after the catch, but still very solid. He's an average blocker, so he's still possible he could be out there on every down. I could certainly see him taking over from Noah Fant sooner rather than later. And if you look at the wide receiver depth chart for the Seahawks, and you look at what Sam Darnold's done with tight ends in the past, I think he could be a real fantasy weapon. Now, to be clear, I still wouldn't be taking him ahead of most of the other positional players, but very late second round, I think he comes into the conversation. And I do have him ahead of Terrence Ferguson by about half a round. I'm thinking Ferguson is more of a third round guy. My greatest issues with Ferguson is that I just don't think he's able to do enough. I feel like he's going to be solid down the seam, but he's not very good in contested catches. He's going to be fine in the red zone. He can find space, but it's not like he's going to dominate smaller defensive players. So that's a bit of an issue. He doesn't create great separation with his route running. His route running's pretty average relative to a lot of these other guys. I feel like this was a big reach for the Rams. So while I would generally, if this was an Arroyo or a Taylor, have felt really good about this situation because I do feel like Tyler Higbee's only got a year or two left in him. I just don't like the player in Ferguson. I feel like he's ultimately going to get replaced sooner rather than later. There is the risk of that at least. So for that reason, I'm thinking more of a third round for him. Having said that, if you're desperate for a tight end and you want the upside, I feel like Ferguson's got upside because of the situation, because of his situation he goes into and the type of player he is. He does have room for growth, whereas we kind of know what those other guys are. And he's a solid enough blocker that it is possible he might be able to play on all three downs. It just feels like when you've got those receivers they've got in LA, especially with Devontae Adams joining Puka Nacua, how many targets are there really going to be going around in the next year or two anyway? Harold Fannin is a very good receiver, but he's a very poor blocker. I think he's going to get taken out a lot in the red zone, even if he can somehow get the starting role. I can't imagine him playing on every down. And if your guy's not playing on every down, that's an issue. If your guy's not playing on every down in the red zone, that's where tight ends score a lot of their points through touchdowns. You're really limiting yourself. I do feel like he could turn into a possession receiver and take over from David Njoku, who's pretty good at doing that. The problem is Njoku is very good in the red zone as well, and he gets a lot of his points through touchdowns. Fannin, I think it's hard to see him being able to do that. That is just not his strength. Unless he can improve his blocking a lot, it's going to be hard for him to be a starter flat. That is the real challenge with him. Having said that, once you get into the fourth round, it is totally reasonable to take him because you're taking guys in any other position who are also probably not going to be starters. So Fannin does have that upside. I think it's just unlikely he reaches it. Gunnar Helm's another in that situation where it is hard to see him being a starter. He's a very solid receiver, but I don't think his blocking is good enough to get me excited. And he's kind of not that different to Chig Okonkwo. Okonkwo is more athletic. Helm's more of a big-bodied guy. I just feel like Okonkwo offers more. So while Okonkwo is there, it's hard to see Helm going past him, even though I do think Helm is a very solid player. Plus, they've already got Josh Wiley as their main blocking guy anyway. So I'm not really sure how they're going to use Helm. He is still better than any of the lower down guys. At least he was taken early on day 3 as well. But I wouldn't get excited about getting him. I would consider him very late in the fourth round, and most of your drafts are only going to go to the fourth round anyway for a 12-team league, but he is someone you can at least feel like there is some upside of him turning into something. If we get a little bit deeper, there's a couple of names that are a little bit interesting. Mitchell Evans, I don't mind. Obviously, coming off an ACL injury means that it's going to take him a while to get back into it, but it does at least mean there's some upside. He's definitely got some potential. He's a good blocker, which is going to give him opportunities to get out on the field because that is not really Jatavian Sanders' strength. But it also probably means that it's not going to be great for fantasy unless he's able to improve his separation and his receiving. So for that reason, I'm not excited enough to draft him, but I would start considering him in a deeper league. You're talking about, fifth round, late fifth round, early sixth round, if you're going that deep for whatever reason. I much prefer Gadsden. I feel like there's potential on this depth chart. I don't think that Tyler Conklin offers that much. I feel like he looked good at the Jets simply because they kept on checking down over and over again. It's not like he was doing anything special. We know that the Chargers love Will Dissly, and rightly so. He just does what they need to do. He's one of the better paid tight ends, but it's not like he's a great receiver. He's just a very solid blocker who does everything solidly. I don't see any reason why Gadsden can't eventually take over in that situation. He's got very good range. I feel like this is a possibility that he could turn into something. So for that reason, if you're going down to the 5th round or you're in a tight end premium league, I feel like he's someone that should at least be drafted. Jackson Hawes and Robbie Oots, I'm not interested in at all. These are very much blocking guys. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Oots ends up playing as a fullback. There is no interest here for either of these guys for me. They're very crowded depth charts already. I'm not excited about the possibilities of either of these guys turning into a good receiving option and hence a good fantasy option. Gavin Bartholomew, at least there's opportunities on this depth chart with TJ Hawkinson coming back from serious injury and a risk of one more injury just knocking him out. Josh Oliver's been around for a while, but I feel like Bartholomew is the kind of players where you could kind of go, potentially there's opportunities there. The problem is the talent's not really there. I think even in the 6th round, it was a bit early to be drafting him. But from a fantasy perspective, you can at least see a path to a potential starting spot. Much prefer Fedone, but again, he's going in the 7th round. There's a very crowded depth chart. He might not even make the roster, but if he does, there are openings there. It's not like Johnson or Bellinger are amazing players. We're seeing Greg Dulcich totally fall off the radar altogether. So there is the possibility he'll rise up. So in a very, very, very deep league, I would consider him here. I feel like that he could have gone earlier in the draft and that the potential and the talent's there. It is going to take years, though. So you'd want to be in a super deep, I'm talking 20-plus team league before you're considering him. Same thing with Caleb Lohner. I don't know. He's very much someone they're going to work on over a number of years. Former basketball player. We've seen that work at times in the past, but the NFL's a little bit more, it's developed a little bit since we were talking about guys like Antonio Gates. For that reason, I think it's unlikely. He might make the practice squad and develop from there. But if you look at that depth chart, there are opportunities. But while Evan Ingram's there, he's not getting a starting role. And I think it will take 3 or 4 years before any team is even considering giving him a chance in the NFL. Matavo, I'm not particularly interested in, not only because that depth chart is pretty crowded, but also just because he's an average player. He's pretty big, but he doesn't offer much else. So for fantasy, you don't need him. Luke Lachey is probably the most interesting of these late round guys. Obviously, he moves into a depth chart that's pretty crowded with Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper. But both of those guys are aging, and there are going to be opportunities for him to shift up. I had him in college fantasy last year. In fact, the last couple of years at Iowa, he was pretty solid there, and he would have been drafted a lot earlier if not for a heap of injuries. The problem is he might end up profiling in the NFL as more of a pure blocker, than a true receiving tight end. I just don't know that he's got the tools to make it work in the NFL like he did in college. So for that reason, I'm not as excited about him for fantasy, but there is at least upside here, and he's the last of the guys that I would really consider drafting in fantasy. If you really want an upside pick, I feel like he's got the most upside of everybody on this page. It is truly possible that he will become a starting tight end in the NFL. I find that hard to believe with guys like Evans and Gadsden, but I do think it's very possible for Lachey. So for that reason, if you're willing to be patient, he is someone that you can take late in your drafts and you can feel okay about the upside. Having said that, we did the same thing with Jaheim Bell last year. He was taken in the 7th round and nothing came of that at all. And Lachey's going to have to fight him for a roster spot. So we're talking about a guy who, I don't know, half the time isn't even going to make the roster, but it is possible on an outside chance that he will become a very solid tight end in the NFL. And we do know that late round tight ends do occasionally hit anyway. So there's potential there. Anyway, that's all we've got for the tight ends. I will be back in the coming days with more fantasy content. We're going to be talking about dynasty rankings in general, starting off with the quarterbacks. If you've got any questions for your dynasty leagues, I know there's a lot of rookie drafts and trades going on, hit us up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. If you want to check out my rankings, ffdfantasyfootball.com is the place to go. We've just revamped the website. Looks very different. Let us know if you want anything changed or if you feel like anything needs to improve with that as well. And finally, it would be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. That really helps us out. Looking forward to catching you guys on the next video.